Come here. No, not over there. Sit close enough that I don't have to raise my voice. When you've lived for 91 years, you learn something strange. The loudest moments of your life are rarely the ones people remember. It's the quiet ones. The sentence spoken almost in a whisper. The hand that lets go a second too soon. The silence after someone says, "We need to talk." My name is Margaret Eleanor Brooks. I'm 91 years old. 3 months ago. My daughter looked at me across my own kitchen table, folded her hands together, and accidentally broke my heart. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She simply smiled the way people smile when they've rehearsed a difficult conversation all the way home. Then she said, "Mom, I think it's time." Time. Such a small word. 4 letters. Yet somehow, it carried the weight of an entire lifetime. You see, when your child says those words, the little girl you once carried through thunderstorms because she was afraid of lightning, the little girl who insisted monsters only lived under her bed, never yours. When that little girl grows into a 60-year-old woman and places glossy brochures on your kitchen table, you already know what comes next. She wanted me to move into a nursing home. Of course, she didn't call it that. No one ever does. She called it a senior lifestyle community. Independent living with support. A place where you'll be safe. Safe. People use that word a lot when they get scared. Sometimes they mean love. Sometimes they mean fear. And sometimes they mean, "I don't know how to keep losing sleep over you anymore." Before you judge my daughter Susan, please don't. She isn't cruel. She isn't selfish. She's a woman who spent 38 years trying to be everything for everyone. A husband whose back has been bad since the factory closed. A son going through a divorce. A daughter juggling 3 jobs. And somewhere, between helping everyone else, she kept trying to save her 91-year-old mother. That isn't selfish. That's exhaustion wearing the clothes of responsibility. Everything changed because of a fall. Funny, isn't it? People imagine old age arrives with a dramatic collapse. It doesn't. It sneaks in quietly. Mine arrived on a Tuesday morning. No, Wednesday. I remember because Wednesdays were pie days. For 62 years, every Wednesday I baked an apple pie. First for William, my husband, then for Susan and her younger brother Daniel. Later, just for William and me after the children left home. And finally, for myself. Though after William died, pie never tasted quite the same. Grief changes recipes, even when you use exactly the same ingredients. That morning, I reached for the cinnamon on the top shelf. William built that shelf in 1978. Everyone keeps telling me to move the spices lower. I refuse. My arms didn't shrink. The shelf simply became more ambitious. That's my version of the story. And at 91, I've earned the right to keep my own version. I stretched, my slipper slid, my balance disappeared, and just like that, I was lying on the kitchen floor. Nothing dramatic, no terrible scream, no broken bones, just one old woman, looking up at a ceiling she'd painted with the man she loved 40 years earlier. I stayed there for nearly 20 minutes. Not because I couldn't stand, because, for the first time in a long time, no one needed me. So I let myself think about William, about growing old, about how strange it feels when your own body slowly becomes someone else's concern. Unfortunately, Susan had installed cameras. Only for emergencies, Mom. Emergencies. That's another interesting word. Sometimes it means danger. Sometimes it simply means someone else no longer trusts your independence. 12 minutes later, Susan burst through the front door. She looked terrified. She knelt beside me. Her hands were shaking harder than mine. "Mom, are you hurt?" I looked at her, then smiled. "I'm thinking. She blinked. What? I'm thinking. I wasn't finished yet. She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she cried. Not loudly. Our family has never been loud criers. We belong to the generation that cries while washing dishes or standing in the shower, where no one can hear. She made me tea. Far too weak. William used to joke that my tea could dissolve a horseshoe. Susan's tasted like warm disappointment. I drank it anyway. Then she looked at me and whispered, I can't keep doing this. For a second, I wanted to answer, doing what? I'm the one lying on the floor. What exactly are you carrying? But then, I really looked at her. Dark circles beneath her eyes, shoulders pulled tight, the face of a woman who hadn't rested in years. And suddenly, I recognized her. Because once, that face had been mine. When I worked all day, cooked all evening, stayed awake with sick children all night, and somehow still smiled the next morning. Exhaustion recognizes itself, across generations, across decades, without another word. I reached across the table and held my daughter's hand. All right, I said softly, let's talk. Her first solution was simple. Come live with us. So I packed 2 suitcases. Not because that was everything I owned, because Susan gently suggested I could always bring more later. People don't realize how painful those words become after 90. Bring more later. As though a lifetime could be collected in installments. She moved me into Daniel's old bedroom. The walls were freshly painted. The bed was comfortable. Everything smelled like lavender. Nothing smelled like home. The first few days, I pretended I was adjusting. By day 4, I realized I had become a guest in someone else's life. Every cabinet opened the wrong way. Every cup lived somewhere unexpected. The coffee came from tiny plastic capsules that hissed louder than they brewed. I spent nearly 10 minutes searching for sugar. When I finally found it, it was labeled organic cane crystals. William would have laughed himself breathless. It's sugar wearing a tuxedo, he would have said. I missed my chipped blue mug. I missed the old refrigerator that hummed through the night. I even missed the squeaky cabinet door Susan always complained about, because those little inconveniences were proof that I belonged somewhere. One evening, I overheard Susan talking on the phone. I love Mom, she whispered, but I don't know how much longer I can do this. Silence. Then, I feel guilty for even saying that. She never called me a burden. She didn't have to. Some words don't need to be spoken. You hear them anyway. 12 days later, I packed those same 2 suitcases. Susan stood beside the front door, the very doorway where William and I measured her height every birthday with a pencil. She hugged me longer than usual. I'm sorry, Mom. I kissed her forehead. No, sweetheart. You opened your home. I just couldn't find myself inside it. Neither of us cried. Sometimes, love is too tired for tears, and neither of us realized the hardest part of our story hadn't even begun. The second solution arrived wearing white sneakers and carrying a clipboard. Her name was Maria Alvarez, 46 years old, originally from Puerto Rico, a licensed caregiver with 20 years of experience. She had kind brown eyes, the sort that instantly make you trust someone. And maybe that was part of the problem. She wasn't supposed to be someone I trusted. She was supposed to be proof that I no longer trusted myself. The agency described her as compassionate, professional, reliable. They were absolutely right. Maria was every one of those things. She folded blankets with perfect hospital corners, cooked meals low in sodium, labeled leftovers with neat handwriting, watered my plants before I even remembered they needed water. She treated me with respect, never once spoke to me like I was a child. She did everything exactly right. And somehow, everything still felt wrong. The first morning she asked, "What time would you like breakfast, Mrs. Brooks?" I smiled politely. "The same time I've eaten breakfast since Franklin Roosevelt was president." She laughed. "I'll write that down." "No," I said. "You really can't." She looked confused. "You can write 8 o'clock. You can write oatmeal. You can even write 2 slices of toast. But you can't write when I feel hungry. Because that's different. Old age steals enough choices. I wasn't ready to surrender one more. A week later, I walked into my bedroom. Maria was folding my sweaters, carefully, neatly, lovingly. And for reasons I still can't fully explain, I felt tears fill my eyes. Not because she'd done anything wrong, because another woman was touching the life I had spent 70 years building. She folded William's favorite flannel shirt, the blue one. The sleeves were worn thin around the elbows. He refused to throw it away. "It still has another winter in it," he'd always say. He died wearing a different shirt. But somehow, seeing someone else fold that blue flannel felt like watching a stranger rearrange my memories. Maria noticed my expression immediately. "I'm sorry. I should have asked first." I shook my head. "No. You did exactly what you're supposed to do. And that's what hurts." She stayed 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, she became less like an employee and more like an unwelcome reminder that everyone believed I was slowly disappearing. One afternoon, Susan stopped by after work. She smiled when she saw fresh flowers on the dining table. "The house looks wonderful." "It does," I agreed. "It just doesn't feel like mine anymore." She looked around. "What do you mean?" I looked at the spotless kitchen, the organized cabinets, the perfectly folded blankets. "The house is happier." I'm not. That evening, after Maria left, I opened my checkbook. $4,100 for 1 month. I stared at the number for a very long time. William spent 36 years teaching history at Lincoln High School. He used to joke that teachers became rich only after they died, when people finally realized how much they had done. He left me enough savings to live comfortably, not extravagantly, comfortably. At this rate, those savings would disappear long before I did. I closed the checkbook. The next morning, I made coffee. Real coffee. Too strong. Too sweet. Exactly the way William loved it. Then I called Susan. "I don't want Maria coming anymore." Silence. "Mom, I've already signed the contract." "I know, but I'm not asking. I'm telling you." She sighed. "She's helping you. I don't need help living. I need a reason to." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Susan whispered, "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever known." I smiled. "No, I'm just trying very hard, not to become someone I don't recognize." Maria hugged me on her last day. She held both my hands. "You've taught me something." I laughed softly. "I thought you were here to teach me." "You reminded me," she said, "that independence isn't measured by what people can still do. It's measured by what they refuse to give away." I watched her drive down the street. She was a wonderful woman. She deserved every kind word I could offer. But as her car disappeared around the corner, I breathed easier. For the first time in weeks, the silence inside my house belonged to me again. 3 days later, Susan arrived carrying one final brochure. She didn't smile this time. She didn't pretend. She simply placed it on my kitchen table. Willow Creek Senior Living. Across the front was a beautiful stone fountain, colorful flowers, white rocking chairs, happy gray-haired couples holding hands. It looked less like a retirement community and more like a vacation brochure written by someone who had never been lonely. "We're just going to look," Susan said quietly. "That's all." I agreed, mostly because I had run out of ways to say no. The director greeted us at the entrance. Her name was Rebecca, perhaps 38, bright smile, perfect hair, the sort of energy only people under 40 possess before 9 in the morning. "Mrs. Brooks, we're so excited you're here." Excited. Such an interesting choice of words. Nobody has ever looked excited. To watch someone slowly surrender their independence. She showed me the apartment. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchenette. Spotless, comfortable, efficient. Then she proudly opened the closet. "You'll be amazed how much storage space you have." I stared at the narrow shelves. Immediately, I thought about my own closet, William's old fishing jacket, still hanging exactly where he'd left it. My wedding dress carefully boxed on the top shelf. A tiny music box he'd won for me at the county fair in 1964. A pair of dancing shoes I hadn't worn in 20 years, but couldn't bear to throw away. Rebecca saw storage. I saw everything I would have to leave behind. Lunch was served in the dining room. Everyone smiled politely. Conversations floated through the air. But something felt muted, as if every person there had lowered the volume of their own life. Rebecca explained the daily schedule. Breakfast at 7:30, exercise at 9, lunch at noon, activities at 2, dinner at 5, lights out encouraged by 9:30. Encouraged. I almost laughed. When you're 91, you have earned the right to eat pie at midnight, read until 2 in the morning, or dance barefoot in your kitchen because an old Frank Sinatra song reminds you of your husband. No schedule. Should decide that for you. On the drive home, neither Susan nor I spoke. Then finally, I whispered the one sentence I had been holding inside all afternoon. "I'm not ready to disappear." Susan tightened her hands around the steering wheel. Without taking her eyes off the road, she answered quietly, "I know, but I'm running out of ways to keep you here." Neither of us realized that the answer to both our fears was already waiting on the other side of my street. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of the nursing home, not even because of the argument. I couldn't stop thinking about something Susan had said. "I'm running out of ways to keep you here." She thought she meant keeping me alive. But I wondered, had I already stopped living? The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Habit. When you've spent 40 years making breakfast for a family, your body never truly forgets, even when there's no one left waiting at the table. I wrapped William's old navy blue robe around my shoulders. The cuffs were frayed. Susan had threatened to replace it every Christmas for nearly 10 years. She never understood. It wasn't a bathrobe anymore. It was memory stitched into fabric. Outside, October had arrived quietly. The kind of October morning that can't decide whether summer is leaving, or autumn is simply waiting its turn. The air carried the smell of damp leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once. Then everything became still. I stepped onto my front porch, not because I had somewhere to go, just because I needed proof that the world still existed beyond my front door. William used to say, "When life feels too heavy, Margaret, step outside. The sky has a way of reminding us we're not carrying everything alone." I never understood what he meant, until I became the only one left to carry our memories. Then, I heard it. Someone was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was the kind of crying people do when they believe no one is listening. The kind that stays trapped behind closed lips. I froze. The sound came from the small white house across the street. Number 16. A young woman had rented it almost a year earlier. I'd seen her carrying boxes by herself. I'd seen a little girl drawing chalk flowers on the sidewalk. I'd waved once. She smiled politely. And that had been the entire history of our relationship. I should have walked over months ago. When I was younger, that's exactly what I would have done. I'd have baked a pie, introduced myself, asked if she needed anything. But somewhere after William died, without noticing, I'd become the woman who watched life through curtains instead of walking into it. I looked back toward my front door. I could still go inside, make tea, pretend I hadn't heard anything. After all, I was 91. My knees argued with every staircase. My hands trembled when I buttoned sweaters. Some mornings I forgot why I'd entered a room. What business did I have trying to rescue someone else? Then I heard the crying again, and suddenly, I remembered another morning, 47 years earlier. Susan was 7, Daniel had pneumonia, William was working overtime because the school district had cut teachers' salaries. I had exactly $23 until payday. I locked myself in the bathroom, turned on the shower, and cried. Not because I wanted to, because there was nowhere else for the fear to go. That sound. The sound of a mother crying before breakfast never leaves you. I knew exactly what I was hearing. So, I crossed the street, slowly, very slowly. When you're 91, crossing a street becomes less about walking and more about negotiating with gravity. I rested one hand on my mailbox, another on the neighbor's fence. By the time I reached her porch, I was breathing harder than I'd like to admit. The young woman looked up. Her eyes were red. Her hair was tied into a hurried ponytail. Coffee stained one sleeve of her sweatshirt. She looked exhausted, not sleepy, soul exhausted. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't realize anyone could hear me." I smiled. My hearing survived better than my knees. For the first time, the corner of her mouth lifted, just a little. "I'm Margaret. I live across the street." She wiped her face quickly. "I'm Emily." There it was, 2 strangers, sitting on cold wooden steps, sharing silence before sharing words. I've learned something after 91 years. People think kindness begins with advice. It doesn't. Kindness begins by staying long enough for someone to stop pretending they're okay. We sat quietly for nearly a minute. Then Emily whispered, "My car won't start. My daughter has school in 45 minutes. I have to be at the hospital by 7:30. If I'm late again..." She stopped speaking. I waited. Finally, she finished. "I'll lose my job." She looked embarrassed. "As ridiculous as it sounds, I don't know who to call." That sentence broke my heart, not because of the broken car, because every human being deserves to have someone they can call before sunrise. Emily had no one. No parents nearby, no husband, no neighbors, no safety net. Only a frightened little girl inside the house, waiting for breakfast. "What does your daughter call herself?" Emily blinked. "What?" "Children always tell you who they are before they tell you their names." She smiled faintly. "Lily. She's 5. 5. The same age Susan had been, when she believed Band-Aids could fix absolutely everything." "Where does Lily go to school?" "Jefferson Elementary." I smiled. "My children walked there every day." Emily looked surprised. "You know it?" "I've known it longer than you've been alive." The words escaped my mouth before I had time to think. "I'll walk her." Emily stared at me. "I'm sorry?" "I'll take Lily to school. You get to work. I'll handle the rest." She looked frightened. Not of me, of trusting someone. I understood. Trust has become expensive these days, especially for young mothers. "You don't know me," she whispered. "That's true. But I know tired. I know fear. And I know what it feels like. To believe you're carrying the whole world by yourself." She looked toward her front door, then back at me. "I couldn't ask you to do that." I laughed. "My dear, at my age, people stop asking you to do things. They only ask if you need help. Do you know what that feels like?" She didn't answer. "So let me ask you instead. Will you help me?" She looked confused. "Help you?" "Yes. I haven't had anyone to walk to school with in 7 years. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then the front door opened. A tiny girl stepped outside. Curly brown hair, pink backpack nearly bigger than she was. She held a stuffed elephant by one leg. She looked at me carefully. Children always study faces before they trust smiles. Then she asked, the question that changed my life. Are you somebody's grandma? I laughed so hard. My knees almost gave up completely. I certainly am. My grandchildren live several states away. So these days, I'm a rather unemployed grandmother. Lily tilted her head. She thought for several serious seconds. Then she announced, I think you can borrow me. Emily covered her mouth to hide a laugh. I didn't. I let mine fill the entire porch, because for the first time, since William died, someone hadn't looked at me as an old woman who needed help. A little girl had looked at me and seen someone who still had something to give. Neither of us knew it yet, but that simple walk to school was about to save far more than Emily's job. It was about to give an old woman her life back the next Monday at exactly 7:15 a.m. Someone knocked on my front door, not loudly, just 3 gentle taps. The kind of knock that says, I'm here, but I'm not in a hurry. I already knew who it was. I opened the door. There stood Lily, pink backpack, white sneakers that looked as though they'd been running before sunrise, her stuffed elephant tucked under one arm. Emily stood beside her with 2 paper coffee cups and eyes that still looked tired, but not hopeless anymore. I don't know how to thank you, she said. I smiled. You already have. She frowned. I have? You trusted me. You'd be surprised how rare that becomes. She hesitated before leaving. I'll be back around 4. We'll be here. Lily looked up at me. Are we walking now? We certainly are. She reached for my hand before I even offered it. Children don't overthink kindness. They either feel safe or they don't. And somehow, that little hand found mine as though it had always belonged there. The walk to Jefferson Elementary wasn't long, only 6 blocks. But when you're 91, 6 blocks can hold an entire lifetime. We walked slowly beneath maple trees that had begun turning gold. Leaves drifted through the morning air like tiny letters no one had opened yet. Lily asked questions the entire way, not polite questions, real ones, the kind only children dare to ask. How old are you again? 91. She stopped walking. Her eyes grew wide. Did dinosaurs scare you? I laughed so hard. A man walking his dog actually turned around. No, sweetheart. The dinosaurs had already moved away. She nodded seriously. I thought maybe they were hiding. Children never worry about sounding foolish. Adults spend half their lives worrying about exactly that. Somewhere, we lose something important. By the second week, walking to school had become our routine. Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then Tuesday, because Emily picked up an extra shift, then Thursday, because Lily asked if she could come anyway. One morning, she looked up at me and asked, Did you ever have a best friend? I married him. She smiled. No, I mean a girl. I thought for a moment. I did. Her name was Ruth. What happened? Life happened. We got married, moved away, raised families. We kept saying we'd visit. We thought we'd have time. Lily frowned. Didn't you? I looked at the sidewalk for a long moment. No. We thought tomorrow was guaranteed. It never is. She squeezed my hand tighter. I'm glad you didn't wait for tomorrow with me. Neither was I. Every afternoon, Emily picked Lily up from my house. At first, she always apologized. I'm sorry she's here so long. I'm sorry you have to cook. I'm sorry she talks so much. One evening, I finally interrupted her. "Emily," she looked embarrassed, "stop apologizing." "For what?" "For letting someone love your child." Tears filled her eyes immediately. "I haven't heard anyone say something kind to me in months. I see patients all day. I rush home. I pay bills. I try not to fall behind. I just—" She stopped. I don't remember the last time someone asked how I was. I walked over and hugged her. Not because hugs solve problems, because sometimes people need proof they're not carrying life alone. Without realizing it, the neighborhood began noticing. Mr. George Henderson from number 9 started waving every morning. George was 68, recently widowed. He had the habit of watering the same flowers 3 times a day, mostly because he had nowhere else to be. One Tuesday he called out, "Morning, Margaret. Need any help with those leaves? I've been pretending not to notice them." He laughed. I figured. The next afternoon, he showed up with a rake anyway. By sunset, my yard looked better than it had in years. I baked him peach cobbler. He insisted he'd only stopped by for 15 minutes. He stayed almost 3 hours. Lonely people often do. Then came Helen Parker, 79, retired librarian, lived 2 houses down. We'd spent almost 10 years waving politely from opposite sidewalks. One Thursday, she knocked on my door carrying banana bread. "I've been meaning to visit for years," I smiled. "I've been home the whole time." She laughed, then almost whispered, "I thought you wanted to be left alone." I looked around my quiet kitchen. I believed that too. For a while. It's amazing how loneliness disguises itself. It convinces you that isolation is peace. It isn't. It's just silence that stays too long. Helen began coming every Thursday afternoon. She brought novels. I made soup. Not because we'd planned it, because kindness grows naturally when no one tries to organize it. The biggest surprise was George. One evening, he came over carrying a toolbox. "My kitchen faucet's leaking." "I know. So is mine. I figured I'd practice on yours first." He grinned. The repair took nearly 2 hours, mostly because we spent more time talking than fixing anything. When it was finally finished, I invited him to stay for dinner. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, fresh green beans, nothing fancy, just food that remembered how to comfort people. George took one bite, then quietly put down his fork. I pretended not to notice. After a long silence, he whispered, "My wife always cooked this." I reached over, placed another spoonful onto his plate, and said only, "There's plenty." He nodded, then cried, not loudly, just enough for me to notice. Sometimes, the greatest gift you can give another human being is another helping, not another speech. By November, something extraordinary had happened. Without meetings, without plans, without anyone deciding to create a community, one had quietly appeared. Monday mornings belonged to Lily. Thursday afternoons belonged to Helen. George stopped by almost every weekend pretending something needed fixing. Emily often arrived after work exhausted, only to leave smiling because someone else had listened for a while. And every evening, my kitchen light stayed on a little longer than before. One Saturday, Susan came over unexpectedly. She opened the front door, then simply stood there. Lily sat on the living room rug building a puzzle. George was repairing my screen door. Helen was reading beside the fireplace. Emily was washing vegetables in the kitchen. And I was standing at the stove, making enough chicken soup for everyone. Susan slowly looked around the room, then back at me. "Mom, what is all this?" I stirred the soup, smiled, and answered quietly, "This, my sweetheart, is the only retirement community I ever needed." She looked at every face in that room. Then she looked back at me. For the first time in months, she didn't see someone waiting to be taken care of. She saw her mother living again. And in that moment, everything between us began to change. Susan didn't say much that afternoon. She stayed for dinner. George fixed the loose hinge on my pantry door. Helen brought homemade apple crisp. Emily set the table. Lily insisted everyone use the cloth napkins because soup tastes fancier that way. William would have liked her. He believed every meal deserved real plates, even if all you had was tomato soup and half a loaf of bread. As we sat together, something remarkable happened. Nobody rushed. Nobody checked the time. Nobody stared at a phone. Conversation wandered from childhood memories to favorite Christmas cookies to the terrible music George insisted was real rock and roll. Helen argued. Emily laughed. Lily asked whether squirrels ever got tired of collecting acorns. And for nearly 2 hours, no one talked about my age. No one asked whether I had taken my medication. No one reminded me to be careful. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't 91. I was simply Margaret. When everyone had gone home, Susan stayed behind to help wash the dishes. We worked side by side, the same way we had years ago, when she was 14, standing on a little wooden stool because she wasn't tall enough to reach the sink. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she broke the silence. I was scared. I kept drying the plates. I know. She looked down at the dish towel in her hands. No, I don't think you do. I wasn't scared you were getting old. I was scared that one day I'd come over and there wouldn't be anyone left. I stopped moving. She continued. I kept thinking about the fall, the cameras, the phone calls. I thought every ring meant she couldn't finish. Her voice disappeared. So I finished the sentence for her. You thought it would be the hospital. She nodded. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. I couldn't lose you, Mom. I didn't know how to protect you. And every choice I made seemed to hurt you. I walked around the kitchen table, took both of her hands, the same hands I once held while teaching a little girl how to tie her shoes. My sweetheart, you were never trying to take my life away. You were trying to save it. She cried harder. So why did everything feel wrong? I smiled gently. Because you were trying to protect my body. When what was disappearing was my purpose. People misunderstand growing old. They think older people spend every day worrying about death. Most of us don't. We've made peace with death long before everyone else does. What frightens us is something far quieter, being forgotten while we're still alive. Watching people stop asking for your opinion because they assume you've already had your turn. Having someone carry your groceries without first asking whether you wanted to carry them yourself. Listening to conversations that happen around you instead of with you. Little by little, you begin disappearing. Not because your heart stops beating, because people stop expecting anything from you. And that hurts more than arthritis ever could. Susan looked around the kitchen. The refrigerator was covered with drawings Lily had made. One showed me wearing a giant purple hat. Another had George holding a rake bigger than a tree. Helen looked strangely young in every picture. Children are generous artists. Then Susan noticed one drawing, held in place by a tiny yellow magnet. It showed 5 people standing in front of my house. At the top, written in crooked green letters, were the words, "My family." There was Lily, Emily, George, Helen, and me. No last names, no explanations, just family. Susan smiled through her tears. I don't think I've ever seen you this happy since Dad died. I looked toward William's favorite chair. It was still there, still slightly worn on one arm, still impossible for anyone else to sit in. I've missed him every day. I always will. But grief, I paused, doesn't mean your heart is full. Sometimes it means there's finally room for someone new. Christmas came 6 weeks later. Emily insisted everyone celebrate at my house. George brought far too many decorations. Helen baked enough cookies for an army. Susan and her husband carried in a 12-foot Christmas tree that absolutely did not fit in my living room. Naturally, we kept it anyway. Half the ornaments leaned sideways. The lights tangled twice. George put the angel on backward. Lily declared it the prettiest tree in America. No one argued. That evening, after dinner, Lily climbed onto my lap carrying a folded piece of paper. I made this for you. I opened it slowly. Inside was another drawing. This time, there was a little girl, a young mother, an old woman, a smiling man with gray hair, a lady holding books, a Christmas tree, and a golden dog that looked suspiciously like a horse. Children have wonderfully flexible imaginations. Across the top, she had written, Grandma Margaret's house. Then, very carefully, she looked into my eyes. Can I call you Grandma forever? For just a second, I couldn't answer. Because there are moments in life when gratitude is simply too large for words. So, I kissed her forehead and nodded. I'd like that very much. Today, as I tell you this story, I'm still 91. My knees still complain. I still misplace my glasses. Sometimes, I spend 10 minutes looking for them, only to discover they're hanging from the collar of my sweater. William would find that hilarious. I still miss him. Every morning, every night. Love doesn't end. It simply learns how to live beside absence. People often ask me now, what changed your life? They expect me to say, a miracle, a new medicine, a special exercise. They're always surprised when I tell them. It was a crying stranger, a little girl with too many questions, and one decision, to walk across a street. So if someone you love is growing older, please don't ask only, how can I keep them safe? Ask something far more important. How can I help them keep feeling needed? Because purpose keeps people alive longer than comfort ever will. Older people don't simply need care. They need conversations, responsibility, laughter, someone waiting for them, someone expecting them, someone who still believes they have something worth giving. And if you're fortunate enough to grow old someday, I hope people don't measure your life by how much help you need. I hope they measure it by how many hearts are warmer, simply because you were still here. Because after 91 years, I've learned one truth above all others. Home isn't the place where people take care of you. Home is the place where someone is still grateful that you showed up.